Republican Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona believes that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a really strong door.
Supporters of this bill do not want to protect America's Second Amendment rights because they don't care about Second Amendment rights. Instead of addressing the societal issues that have been caused by decades of progressive left-wing policies that have assaulted the American family and American society, they want to ban guns. But let's talk about what Republicans have proposed, because Republicans have proposed many efforts. You just heard from Mr. Massey, one of his. But here's what you don't hear. I listened very carefully to the majority leader. He was enumerating through polls. But guess what? The majority of Americans believe schools would be safer if teachers were given options to carry a firearm. That comes from The Economist, the latest Economist poll. The Republicans have also said, let's harden the schools. Look, you've got $122 billion that you gave in relief, COVID relief to K-12. More than 90% of it remains unused. And you say, well, that we don't want to talk about doors. What do? We hide behind doors because they work. You can harden schools and make them work. You can arm guards and make them work and make children safer.
That's it. Doors. Big, beautiful, thick doors. Tremendous doors. The biggest doors, the greatest doors. Perhaps doors with bulletproof glass. Maybe some bars over the windows. And hey, you know what? While we're at it, why don't we get all the kids to wear matching jumpsuits, okay? And have numbers on them so we can keep track of them, okay? And, not confuse them with a potential shooter. Why don't we add some more armed guards, maybe, with openly carried long guns, rifles, little barbed wire on the outside, add a few sniper towers, and finally, you've got a prison. That's what you have. You have a prison. That's a prison. Now, I know it's hyperbole, right? But if you don't think that they'll actually try to go to that point? I mean, look, we've already had Ted Cruz talking about putting in man traps. Man traps! Come on. We have metal detectors in a lot of schools. We already have armed guards or resource officers. I mean, how much are we going to try to imprison our children in order to try to coddle a few insane gun hobbyists? Again, that's a fringe minority that is holding us hostage. The vast majority of Americans actually support common sense gun reforms like background checks, waiting periods to buy guns, bans on high capacity magazines, red flag laws, raising the age to buy an AR-15. A lot of that's pretty modest stuff. But you got these clowns out there talking about doors. Doors. And first, by the way, let's get rid of all the doors. Let's just only have one door, said Ted Cruz. Not a good idea, Ted. Because it turns out, if you remove all the doors and only have one, you're going to have a fire hazard. Yeah.
God bless you.
And again, that's one of their ideas. And the other idea is, now let's add bulletproof doors. Again, I don't want our schools to turn into prisons. And I don't think the children also want to go to school in a prison. But now here's the thing, right? We already have a lot of schools across the country that have already done this on their own. They've already installed military-grade doors. I'm not kidding. In fact, and this, might be part of why Republicans are also calling for this. School hardening is turned into an industry worth $2.7 billion, at least now. Billions more spent on school police. So, I mean, we got all that money to spend on bulletproof doors and windows that can stop 100 rounds from an AR-15. Yeah, that's what the doors are rated for. All this fancy security stuff, but we cannot afford to buy new books for kids, or new computers, or new desks, or make sure that the heat and air conditioning work in the winter and summer respectively. Can't do any of that. Oh, no, no, no. Can't do any of that. Any of that. And again, here's the other thing. The jury's still out on whether or not that school hardening is particularly effective. In fact, according to, this is a 2016 study by Johns Hopkins University. Okay. Now they found that there was limited and conflicting evidence in the literature on the short and long-term effectiveness of school safety technology, or otherwise known as school hardening, right? So now, again, that was done in 2016, 6 years ago. And so far still, we've seen from the evidence and the fact that we have more and more school shootings, doesn't seem to be all that effective. But here's what they found. Let me give you some of the details, right? So they found there was, again, limited and conflicting evidence. On the one hand, they say that the schools that have experienced gun violence had consistently cited simple, well-established safety measures as most effective. And what do I mean by that? Rapid lockdown drills, evacuation strategies, doors that can be secured in seconds. Okay, so there is room for doors, resource officers, or other adults who act quickly. However, at the same time, we go forward a couple of years to a 2018 analysis by the Washington Post. They found that in many cases, dozens of cases, having armed school resource officers had failed to actually stop a shooter. Among the more than 225 incidents on campuses since 1999, at least 40% of those affected schools had employed an officer. So they said that the officers didn't necessarily work. However, preparedness for them worked better than that. Now, let me just say, all that's well and good, okay? But it's still a reaction. You know what's better than a reaction? Prevention. Look, being reactionary means you've already had a string of failures in your system, okay? That led to the point of an armed person trying to enter or have already been entered into a school. Or in some cases, having waited outside to shoot someone outside of a school. Now, let me give you that detail. In 2016, for example, Utah's Union Middle School had pretty good security. They had a surveillance system, external doors that could only be accessed with IDs, as well as an armed resource officer. When a 14-year-old boy outside the school shot another student twice in the head during a confrontation outside the building, as after class had ended. So now, Jeffrey P. Haney's district spokesperson said this, quote, "Even if we would have had metal detectors, it would not have mattered. If we would have had armed guards at the entrance of the school, it would not have mattered. If we would have required students to have see-through backpacks and bags, it would not have mattered." So, again, that wasn't in the school. That was right outside the school. Shot and killed. Another example of a school, Huffman High in Birmingham, Alabama. This is, again, another school that had been hardened. In fact, they had surveillance cameras that were mounted inside and outside of the school. And periodically, the 1,370 students were checked for weapons, both with handheld and walk-through metal detectors. You also had 3 armed resource officers that were patrolling the hallways. And yet, even in all that situations, you had a kid who had a handgun. And by the way, this wasn't a mass shooting situation. But this kid brought a handgun from home and was like, "Hey, whoa, look at this. This is so cool. I got a gun. Yeah, everybody tells me I should love guns. Yeah. And then what happened? It accidentally went off, as guns do. And it fatally struck senior Cortland Arrington. She was 2 months away from graduation. Died. An accident. No amount of hardening schools can prevent that. So, you can harden schools all you want. And you might stop a few people, sure. But if you don't do something about the gun culture, as well as the easy access to high-powered weaponry, then you're not solving the problem. All you're doing is throwing money at companies in order to try to turn schools into prisons. Which, again, I'm sure probably doesn't do any favors for the mental health and well-being of those kids that are inside. Not to mention, of course, having to survive a school shooting in the first place. But God forbid, we don't care about that. We only care about the mental well-being of a few psychopaths who have made guns their entire identity.